This is All India Radio. In the program Surkhiyon may now we bring you a discussion on India-Russia Connect. The participants are P.S. Raghavan, former ambassador, and Nilova Roy Chaudhary, journalist.
Russian President Vladimir Putin arrives in Delhi for the 21st annual bilateral India-Russia summit with Prime Minister Narendra Modi on Monday, December the 6th. This in-person summit is being held after 2 years after they last met bilaterally in Vladivostok in September 2019. The summit could not be held in India last year because of the global COVID pandemic. President Putin's visit will provide further impetus to the India-Russia Special and Privileged Strategic Partnership. A number of important agreements related to defense exchanges are likely to be signed during the visit, and the S-400 Triumph missile defense system is also likely to feature. We are joined this evening by Ambassador P.S. Raghavan, who's been the chairman of the National Security Advisory Board and is an old and very well-versed in matters between India and Russia. Ambassador, how important is this particular summit in the context of bilateral relations and the geostrategic environment?
I think it's a very important visit for a number of reasons. One is that we took a year's gap in the annual summitry for reasons of COVID. However, it got interpreted in various ways in various quarters and gave rise to unfounded speculation. So it's very good that they are now in a position to correct these narratives and to discuss the strategic partnership in all its details. As you said, the discussions will have to look at both strictly bilateral cooperation, as well as the world around us, because one of the features of the India-Russia relationship from the time the strategic partnership started in the year 2000, is the fact that it has been impacted by global geopolitical flux at various stages. There are external impacts which also affect the way India and Russia deal with each other. And so they will not only talk about the bilateral relationship like you said, defense, there would also be energy, there would also be economic cooperation that we want to particularly promote, but also about the situation around Afghanistan. And of course, I think Russia-China relations will figure, Russia-Pakistan relations will figure, the Russians would want to know about our initiatives in the Quad and the Malabar, this American legislation called CATSA. To figure, you talked about the S-400 in that context, that will also figure. So there's a pretty wide agenda there that they would cover.
Now, the Russian president's aide, Yuri Ushakov, has told TASS that as many as 10 agreements are likely to be signed. What areas are these particular agreements likely to be covering?
See, I cannot give you inside information because I'm not in government. But what I can, I think, make a reasonable guess as to what they would be. Because there has been talk about this, they said that they will talk about, in terms of defense, some kind of a long-term program of cooperation in defense, which will sort of lay out a roadmap of how we will take our defense cooperation forward in concept terms, in terms of how will we promote indigenization, how will we sort of arrange our interaction in defense. And that I could imagine that would be one of them. Also, our external affairs minister did say when he was in Moscow in July this year that this $1 billion line of credit that the Prime Minister announced in Vladivostok in 2019 as part of the Act Far East initiative. The External Affairs Minister had said that, already some modalities had been worked out and we are looking at a couple of projects, which would be essentially, I should imagine, investment projects for natural resources, hydrocarbons and so on in the Russian Far East. There may be other economic cooperation projects, which is very important because we've been wanting to really ramp up our economic cooperation. That is a weak pillar in our bilateral relationship. So these I can straight away off the top of my head see as possibilities of bilateral agreements that can be signed.
It is also the first time, just before the leaders meet for the summit, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and the Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu will also be in India. And for the first 2+2 external affairs and defense talks with their counterparts here, External Affairs Minister Jaishankar and Raksha Mantri Rajnath Singh. These will be the first bilateral talks in the 2+2 format, which we have with a very few countries at the level of defense and foreign ministers. What does this ramping up, as it were, of the relationship indicate to you? I mean, how important is it to have this format also within the bilateral arrangement?
It's a very significant initiative that was taken. On one plane, of course, one can say that it will also counter this narrative that the India-Russia strategic partnership is running out of steam, as it were, since our more partnership is with the US and with the West and so on. This counters that in the sense that nobody disputes the fact that our relations with the US are very important and they cover a very wide canvas. The point is that also have a relationship with Russia, both for which has bilateral importance as well as importance in the region, which we talked about also. So what the 2+2 sets out to achieve is to actually, coordinate our foreign policy outlook and our strategic perspectives in the region around us and on the global canvas, which will also impact on India-Russia relations. Actually today, no strategic partnership is totally a congruence of interest. There will be a number of interests that will coincide. There will be other areas in which we will diverge in our perspective. The idea actually is to make sure that where we have convergence of interest, we pursue them in a focused manner, and where we have divergences of interest or perspectives, we are able to reconcile them as far as possible and work in a way that does not step on each other's toes. In other words, impact on the core interests of the other country. That is an exercise which a truly strategic partnership should carry out, and that I think is what the 2+2 is intended to do.
Now, India and Russia have always had traditionally a really close certainly security relationship. So why has there been all of these suggestions that the two countries have drifted apart somewhat? And, there have been these suggestions that keep coming up, it's either the United States or Russia. So why exactly has this gained credence somewhat?
Well, rather paradoxically, part of the reason is that, we have this traditional, very close relationship. And therefore, if there is a sign that we are also developing relations with other countries, it somehow seems a dilution of relations with Russia. The fact of the matter is, as we go further and further away from the Cold War, you have geopolitical flux in the world, you have matrix of interests crisscrossing each other, and therefore you do not have, as I said earlier, you cannot have a congruence of interest with any one country, which means basically the India-Russia relationship cannot have the exclusivity, if you like, of the past. It cannot have the same salience of the past, which does not mean that we do not have important strategic interests. We do, and we are pursuing them. But it does not mean that Russia is our sole partner.
Right.
So, you have these are all public narratives, some facile argument. If you say that Russia-China relations are increasing, it's like saying that, my best friend has run away with my enemy. That kind of imagery is not helpful. International relations today are far more nuanced. We have diversified our relationship. We have diversified our military acquisitions.
Indeed. Now, the point is also that, of course, the defense component is huge. And in the current circumstances, the energy cooperation component is also equally huge. And I believe the head of Rosneft is also accompanying President Putin this time. Given the rising prices and given all of the energy problems that Russia being part of OPEC also, do you think there's one of the things that will be talked about is Russia ramping up oil production to maybe ease prices globally?
Well, maybe that will be talked about, but that is not really a bilateral issue between India and Russia. That is part of a rather large debate. And Russia is actually not even a member of OPEC. It is a member of OPEC Plus. It has some influence on OPEC, but OPEC is effectively led by Saudi Arabia, and there are a number of undercurrents. There are political undercurrents, there are economic undercurrents, there are also differences within OPEC itself. That's not such an easy decision to take, and also there is a US-Russia dynamic that plays itself out on this. There has been a lot of interaction and a strategic fine-tuning of perspective.
So these talks on Monday are going to be extremely fruitful, and lots probably will emerge from it in terms of firming up our respective positions. Thank you very much, indeed, Ambassador Raghavan. We've run right out of time.
You were listening to a discussion on India-Russia Connect. The participants were P.S. Raghavan, former ambassador, and Nilova Roy Chaudhary, journalist. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of All India Radio. You can listen to it on our mobile app News on AIR. This program is also available on our YouTube channel News on AIR Official. You may email your opinion about this program at airnsdtalks@gmail.com.